Central African Republican. Executive Summary. The Central African Republic is a presidential republic. Faustin Archange Touadera was elected president for a second five-year term in the first round during December 2020 presidential and legislative elections marred by widespread violence. In December 2026, armed groups formerly in the peace process combined to form a new alliance, the Coalition of Patriots for Change, led by former President Francois Bozize, and called for a suspension of the electoral process and the establishment of national consultations. These groups significantly disrupted the presidential and legislative elections. More than half of the country's polling stations were unable to return results primarily due to insecurity, and only an estimated 37% of all registered voters were able to cast votes for the presidential elections. As a result of election-related insecurity, President Touadera requested support from the Russian Federation government, which facilitated the deployment of a Russian private military company, Wagner Group, and Rwandan forces. Several opposition leaders denounced irregularities in the elections. International observers found the elections not to be free and fair due to an increased level of violence and intimidation by armed groups. On June 11, President Touadera appointed Henri-Marie Dandra as Prime Minister. Police and gendarmes are responsible for enforcing law and maintaining order. The Central African Armed Forces report to the Ministry of Defense and have the primary role of maintaining internal security. The President is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Police and the Gendarmerie report to the Ministry of Interior and Public Security. Civilian authorities' control over security forces continue to improve but remain weak. There were credible reports that members of the security forces, along with Russian private military company elements from the Wagner Group, engaged in active combat and committed human rights abuses at a rate comparable to armed groups. State authority beyond the capital improved with the increased deployment of prefects and troops in provincial capitals. Armed groups, however, still controlled some portions of territory throughout the country and acted as de facto governing bodies in those areas, taxing local populations and appointing armed group members to leadership roles. Significant human rights issues included credible reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings by the government, forced disappearances by the government, torture by the government, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrest or detention, serious abuses in the context of an internal conflict, including killing of civilians, enforced disappearances, torture and physical abuse or punishment, unlawful recruitment or use of child soldiers, and other conflict-related abuses by armed groups, restrictions on free expression and media, including the existence of criminal libel laws, serious government corruption, lack of investigation of and accountability for gender-based violence, and laws criminalizing consensual same-sex conduct between adults. The government took steps to investigate and prosecute government officials for alleged human rights abuses and corruption, including in the security forces. Nevertheless, a climate of impunity and a lack of access to legal services remained obstacles to citizens' ability to obtain formal justice. Intercommunal violence and targeted attacks on civilians by armed groups continued. Armed groups perpetrated serious abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law during these internal conflicts. Ex-Seleka, Anti-Balaka, and other armed groups committed unlawful killings, torture and other mistreatment, abductions, sexual assaults, looting, and destruction of property. The government stated it was investigating several high-profile cases of intercommunal violence during the year and considering charges of crimes against humanity and war crimes against perpetrators. Note, this report refers to the ex-Seleka for all abuses attributed to the armed factions associated with Seleka, including the Popular Front for the Renaissance in the Central African Republic and the Union for Peace, which were formed after Seleka was dissolved in 2013. The armed group known as Return, Reclamation, Rehabilitation also committed serious human rights abuses during the year.